For 23 years, my wife Claire believed she understood exactly who I was. To her, I was a quiet businessman who worked hard, lived comfortably, and preferred an ordinary life over expensive cars, designer clothes, and public attention. I never corrected her assumptions. Whenever she asked about my work, I simply told her I handled investments and private business matters. It was true, but it was nowhere near the whole story. I had learned a long time ago that money could change the way people looked at you, and I never wanted my marriage to be built around a number on a bank statement. Claire seemed perfectly happy with our simple lifestyle, or at least I believed she was. We lived in a beautiful but modest home, traveled occasionally, and avoided the kind of attention that came with great wealth. But over the last year, something about her began to change. She became distant, protective of her phone, and increasingly uninterested in the small conversations that had once filled our evenings. If I asked how her day had gone, she would give me a short answer and return to her screen. If I suggested spending a weekend together, she suddenly had other plans. I noticed everything, but I kept my questions to myself because I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation. Then one Thursday evening, Claire came home with an unusual announcement. She told me she had been invited on a luxury cruise and needed a few days away. She said it would be good for her to clear her mind and relax. I looked at her carefully and asked who was going with her. She hesitated for just a moment before saying it was a friend. I could tell she was hiding something, but I didn't challenge her. The following morning, she packed 2 large suitcases and dressed more carefully than usual. Before leaving, she walked toward me, gave me a brief kiss on the cheek, and said she would call when she arrived. I watched her leave through the front door, carrying everything she believed she needed for a new beginning, while I stood out there, knowing the cruise she was about to board was connected to a secret she had never even imagined. And the man waiting for her at the terminal was someone I already knew far better than she realized. The cruise ship Claire was about to board was not simply a luxury vacation destination. It was the centerpiece of an empire I had spent decades quietly building. From the outside, it looked like a magnificent floating city, stretching hundreds of meters across the ocean, with elegant restaurants, theaters, private lounges, swimming areas, gardens, entertainment spaces, and thousands of details designed to make wealthy passengers feel as if they had entered another world. What Claire never knew was that the company behind that ship belonged to me. Years earlier, I had started investing in transportation and hospitality businesses when nobody outside a small circle of investors knew my name. I reinvested nearly everything I earned, purchased shares in growing companies, and slowly built a network of private investments. Eventually, those investments led me into the cruise industry. What began as a single business opportunity became something much larger. My companies acquired other companies, expanded into international markets, and eventually became part of one of the most valuable private business groups in the industry. The flagship cruise operation was valued at approximately $45 billion, making it one of the largest assets connected to my business empire. Yet Claire had never seen the boardrooms, financial reports, private offices, or launch ceremonies. She never attended the meetings where decisions involving millions and billions of dollars were made. I deliberately kept those worlds separate from our home life. I continued wearing inexpensive suits, with driving a practical car, and avoiding unnecessary displays of wealth. When people asked about my profession, I described myself as an investment consultant because I had no desire to explain complicated corporate structures or attract attention. Claire accepted that explanation for years. She believed our financial position was comfortable but limited. She thought I had savings and investments, but nothing extraordinary. She never imagined that the man sitting beside her at dinner had ownership interests stretching across several major industries. More importantly, she never suspected that the luxury ship she was excited to visit was connected directly to me. When she told me about her upcoming cruise, I listened quietly. She described the beautiful rooms, restaurants, entertainment, and exclusive experiences she expected to enjoy. I simply smiled and encouraged her to have a good trip. She had no reason to question me because, in her mind, I was staying behind while she sailed away on someone else's expensive ship. What she didn't understand was that every important department aboard that vessel ultimately answered to a company I controlled, and the people preparing for her arrival already knew exactly who she was. Claire arrived at the private cruise terminal early in the afternoon, carrying 2 large suitcases and wearing the confident expression of someone who believed she was finally getting the freedom she had been wanting. She looked around at the massive ship waiting beside the terminal, its white exterior shining beneath the afternoon sun. From where she stood, it appeared almost unreal, more like a floating city than a vessel. Daniel was beside her, smiling as he helped with her luggage. To anyone watching them, they looked like 2 people, beginning an exciting vacation together. But I knew the truth about their relationship, and I knew something else they didn't know. Security cameras had already captured their arrival, and the footage was being monitored by my private office. I received a message confirming that Claire and Daniel had reached the terminal. I stared at the screen for several seconds before responding with a simple instruction. Let them board. I could have stopped them. I could have confronted Claire before she stepped onto the ship. I could have called Daniel and demanded an explanation, but I decided not to do any of those things. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go when they believed I was completely powerless. Claire handed her documents to the staff and walked toward the boarding entrance. She never looked behind her. She never wondered where I was or what I might be thinking. In her mind, she was leaving her old life behind. Daniel walked beside her, speaking quietly and occasionally laughing. They disappeared through the entrance, while the ship's staff continued their preparations. What neither of them realized was that several senior employees already knew Claire's identity. The captain knew her name. The head of security knew she was coming. The senior guest services team had been informed. Even the executives responsible for the ship's daily operations knew exactly who had just boarded. But nobody was allowed to tell her anything. I had given one clear instruction before the cruise began. Treat her like every other passenger and do not reveal my involvement. That evening, as the ship slowly moved away from the terminal, Claire stood on one of the upper decks beside Daniel, watching the coastline disappear into the distance. She probably felt relieved, believing the hardest part was over. Meanwhile, I remained hundreds of miles away, sitting quietly in my home office and watching the first reports arrive from the ship. I knew she had boarded the vessel with another man, believing I had been left behind. But she had no idea that the ship itself was already carrying the secret that would eventually change everything she believed about me. On the 3rd day of the cruise, Claire's confidence began to disappear. Until then, she had enjoyed everything the ship offered without giving much thought to the life she had left behind. She and Daniel had spent their mornings exploring different parts of the vessel, eating at elegant restaurants, attending evening shows, and taking photographs that made their trip look perfect. Claire believed she had finally escaped the routine of her marriage and stepped into a completely different future. Then, during the afternoon, Daniel received an unexpected message from his bank. His account had been temporarily restricted, and several transactions had been placed under review. He immediately tried contacting his financial advisor, but nobody answered his calls. At first, he assumed it was a technical problem. Claire tried to reassure him, telling him not to worry about something that would probably be resolved quickly. But a few minutes later, her own credit card was declined at one of the ship's stores. She tried again, thinking she had entered the wrong information, but the result was the same. Her expression changed. She checked her banking application and saw that one of her accounts had also been placed under review. Suddenly, the luxurious surroundings that had seemed so exciting began to feel strangely uncomfortable. Daniel told her they should contact guest services, but before they could leave, a member of the staff approached them politely and asked Claire to accompany her. Claire immediately became suspicious. She asked what the problem was, but the employee simply explained that there was an administrative matter that required clarification. Claire followed her reluctantly to the guest services area, where she was asked to wait. While she sat there, she noticed something unusual. Every employee who passed through the area seemed calm, but there was a strange level of attention surrounding her situation. Nobody was rude or threatening, yet everyone appeared to know more than they were saying. Then an executive walked toward her, carrying a tablet. He greeted her respectfully and said there was a private matter she needed to discuss with someone from the company's senior management. Claire frowned and asked who wanted to speak with her. The executive paused before answering. "Mr. Carter is ready to see you." For a moment, Claire didn't react. The name sounded familiar because it was her husband's name. She stared at the executive and asked what her husband had to do with the cruise, but the man didn't answer her question. Instead, he calmly asked her to follow him down a quiet corridor to a private conference room, while Claire slowly began to realize that something about this entire journey had been hidden from her. Claire stepped into the private conference room, expecting to meet a senior executive, perhaps someone who wanted to discuss the strange financial issues that had suddenly appeared. Instead, she stopped the moment she saw me standing beside the large windows overlooking the ocean. For several seconds, she simply stared at me as if her mind could not understand what her eyes were seeing. I had not changed my clothes or appearance dramatically. I was still the same quiet husband she had left behind at home. But something about the way the employees had treated me suddenly made sense. She looked around the room and noticed several framed photographs showing the cruise company, its executives, and the ship during its launch ceremony. Then her eyes stopped on one particular photograph. It showed me standing beside the vessel on the day it officially entered service. Claire slowly walked toward it, staring at the image before looking back at me. "You own this?" she asked quietly. I nodded. Her face lost its color. She looked at the photograph again. Then, at the documents arranged across the conference table. One of them showed the corporate ownership structure behind the company operating the ship. My name was clearly listed among the principal owners. Claire picked up the document with trembling hands and read it several times. as if repeating the words would somehow make them less shocking. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she finally asked. I looked at her without anger. "Because I never wanted money to become the reason you stayed with me." She lowered her eyes. I reminded her that whenever she asked about my work, I had never actually claimed to be poor. I simply never explained the full scale of my investments. I told her that I had spent decades building businesses quietly, and that the cruise company was only one part of a much larger portfolio. Claire seemed unable to process the information. She had boarded the ship believing she was escaping an ordinary marriage with an ordinary man. Now she was discovering that the man she had dismissed was responsible for one of the most valuable businesses connected to the vessel beneath her feet. She asked where Daniel was, and I told her he was waiting outside. Her expression changed immediately, because she finally understood that he had been traveling with her on a ship controlled by the very husband she believed she had left behind. And as the conference room door slowly opened, Daniel stepped inside and saw me sitting there, completely silent, waiting for him to understand exactly where he was.